Alright, everybody. Well, this is the first episode of People and Places, and my guest today is a friend of mine from a job I used to have. Her name is Paula. So, I know that in our conversations that we've had at Unnamed Job, we have gotten to kind of know each other, but for the people that are listening, why don't you tell them a little bit of who you actually are, or who you were before the conversation we're about to have plays into your life?
Well, the first thing I'd like to lead with is that I was born and raised in South Carolina. I am a Clemson alumni. Born, bred, and don't know any better. My parents were both lively, independent, strong people who had 3 daughters and raised us to be the same. We shared a deep bond with music and concerts, which still is a huge part of my life even today. They taught me to be independent, to never depend on anything from anyone, but also taught me to be loving, compassionate, caring, follow the values and morals that they instilled in me. And I was that. That's exactly who I was, and I had a fire inside of me that was contagious. Now looking back, as well as my laugh, from what I've been told. I was living with my sister at the time, paying bills, working, hanging out with friends, going out of town, going to the beach, going to the mountains, going to concerts. I'm a huge reader. I love to read books. I consume them, as a matter of fact. True crime books have always been my favorite. Serial killer books, if I'm going to be quite honest. My mother introduced me at the age of 16. She handed me a Boston Strangler book, and it took off. I've always had a passion for the law. What it's in serial killers in particular, what makes them who they are. I had a goal coming out of college. There were 2 roads that I saw ahead of me. One was either to go to law school and become a sports agent, because I am a football and basketball junkie. And then the other one was to become an FBI profiler. I applied to the FBI. The only thing that held me out of that was that my eyesight is atrocious and I'm legally deaf in my left ear. So I did not qualify for the program just based on those 2 aspects alone.
So I do gotta ask, I know you said they taught you to follow the morals and values that they instilled in you. Did they go to church? Did they practice anything? What kind of touch on that a little bit for us?
Both my parents were raised in the church, Southern Baptist on both sides. My father's mother was a little bit more hardcore than my mother's mother. It was much more relaxed and joyful to go to church with my nanny than it was with my grandma. My grandma would use humiliation tactics and cruelty, which I knew at 8 years old something was not right about that. Even inside of her church, I always felt like that there were eyes that shouldn't have been there. Even to this day, I still feel that way about that church. Not my mama's. I always thrived in my mama's church. My my mom, they would go on Wednesday nights and on Sundays, but my father, they went every day of the week. Every day. So when my parents had us, none of the three of us were raised in the church. We only went during the summer times when we went to stay with our grandparents. But mom and dad, and that was one of my mother's regrets, even on her deathbed, that she did not take us to church like she felt like she should have. And looking back on it, I could understand why, considering my older sisters and my behavior. She feared for our souls, and rightfully so. My daddy was not so much about the organized religion, but more of a spiritualist in it. He believed in God. But he also struggled with finding him because of his own vices. But the basic rule that we were always told as children, and to me it really does boil down to one, is do unto others as you would have done to you. And that was, and to be kind and to be helpful and to be a listening ear, to be a friend, a true friend. That's what my dad taught us the most, even at his own detriment, was to always be there and love how you always needed or wanted to be loved. And that's a huge part, is what led me into this relationship, was, and I'm still that way, that no matter what life throws or what comes at me, no matter what ugly side I see out of you, once I see the good, I will hold on to that little bit of good, no matter what evil you do. And being that way has almost cost me my life several times.
So, to kind of go ahead and jump into it here, I've heard bits and pieces. Okay, I don't know the full aspect of it, and that's where this conversation is going to take us. But for anybody who listens to this, this conversation was brought to me in such a way that I just felt that I needed to do this. My friend here, for sake of just getting it out on the table, is a survivor from a polyamorous relationship that had its tendencies of demonic areas. I'm gonna let you dive in here. This mic is now 100% yours.
How I met the female of this relationship was at work, at a restaurant. I'll never forget, I was bartending, and another girl that worked there had a problem with apparently one of her friends. And the three of them came in looking for this other girl, wanting to fight her. I was behind the bar, and when the woman that I ended up with, we made eye contact when she passed by the bar. And in that moment, I felt an immediate soul connection with her. Even though what they were doing was wrong. And I stopped them. I'm the one who stopped them. I came out from behind that bar and confronted the friend that wanted the fight. And I told her, you have no business here. And if you start this, then you will deal with me. Because I have never shied away from confrontation.
When you say you made the eye contact and you felt that soul connection, Elaborate a little bit more on that.
When we first locked eyes, I felt like I knew her. I knew she was around a bad element, but I could tell that there was some good in her, or at least I thought there was, and maybe there still is. There was a sadness in her eyes, a pain in her eyes that I recognized in myself. I don't have the words for it really, other than I just felt it, like I've always felt connections to other humans, either a soul connection or a connection that my natural instincts told me to run from. And then we started hanging out. Well, first we were just working together, and I started to get to know her, and she started with she was learning me, she was studying me. And we never hung out. It was just a work thing for months and months, but we had mutual friends who would go over to her apartment, and they were all getting high together, smoking weed and hanging out. And when I reached out for the first time was during the NCAA March Madness tournament. I've always pulled for Gonzaga. That's my basketball team. They were the underdogs, the Cinderellas, and I will always pull for the underdog. Well, they were playing UCLA, and they were up. They were winning. No way they lose it. They're 7 points up. Well, they ended up losing, and I ended up melting down. And because we had become closer and actually talking on the phone, it started talking on the phone. It had kind of come outside of work, and where we were calling each other, not really hanging out, but calling each other. I called her and completely had a meltdown about how Gonzaga had lost the basketball game. Because once again, I'm a sports junkie. So, and she said she invited me to come over to hang out, just hang out. So I was like, okay. So I threw my jacket on and went over there, and mutual friends were there, so I felt comfortable. I hadn't really met her boyfriend until this night, and he kind of stayed in the back, but my immediate reaction to him was something was off. Kind of gives you the creeps a little bit, like something's just not right about him. So, but I ignored that, and I ended up smoking weed with them that night, which first time I had smoked weed, I was 14, and I had high school, I on and off with it. First 2 years of college, I was doing it, but the last two, I didn't touch it. In fact, I didn't touch it until that night. And that night started a 15-year weed addiction that what used to be just occasionally, like after a rough shift at work, where I would smoke up with some friends just to kind of relax and, chill a little bit. It started a 15-year being high all day, every day. And it wasn't until I walked out of the door that I just said no more. I didn't want to do it. I had been fighting against it for the last 2 years of this relationship, fighting with her about it, to quit, begging her to quit smoking it in the house with the children, quit smoking it around them, and the kids were coming to me more curious with questions about weed and cigarettes, and alcohol, and because they were becoming teenagers at this point. So, and I was having to make excuses for their mother, and even making excuses for myself, because I have always struggled with depression since I was 14, on and off medication my whole life for it. So instead, I had decided that instead of taking all these psychotic medications, that weed was going to be a way of helping the running thoughts that seemed like a tilt-a-whirl inside my head that I could never get control of.
So really, I guess it's pretty safe to say that this girl and her boyfriend kind of became your gateway into
Yes.
some other things. Like,
Yes.
and then on top of that, because of your involvement, you were the one having to deal with the teenagers getting more curious and finally understanding what's going on.
Yes. Weed, alcohol, all that stuff. It never stuck to me. I was always able to dabble, and when I was done, I was done, and I could walk away. It never hooked me like that, because, well, my oldest sister, I grew up as a teenager. My oldest sister was a raging alcoholic. She started drinking at 15 and did not slow down. And that is actually how she died at the age of 49 from cirrhosis of the liver. She drank herself to death. So alcohol was always... I would go out with friends to bars or to house parties or whatever, and I would drink and I would get drunk, but that would be it, and then I wouldn't touch it for a while.
So it was more of on a social level.
Yes, very much a social drinker. And there would be periods where I would go months without touching it. But weed seemed to be my vice. That's the one I enjoyed the most. That's the one where I could forget about the nightmares happening inside of my head, and I could laugh and relax, and I could sleep. I could sleep without the nightmares. And I now realize I was just numbing myself from the obvious, running from the demons I've been running from my whole life. But I would say that it was my most favorite choice.
So, whereabouts did you start seeing this become more than a social thing as far as your relationship with these people?
It went past it. It was really from her push, where I was just smoking with my friends after work or whatever. I'd never smoked during the daytime, never ever. It was always late at night once I'd gotten off work, and 1, 2, if a big party. I mean, there were lots of blunts flying around, but once, because when she first met me, my house was the party house. Everybody came there on the weekends after we had long shifts, never during the weekday, because me and my sister were like, no to that, and keep some sense of normalcy, but we don't mind kind of throwing it down for the weekend. So we became the party house. I mean, there would be, at any given time, you could roll up on my house and there would be 50, 60 people, like bowling out of the house, in the backyard, in the front yard, all in the house. We had a swimming pool. We would set out slip and slides, and a lot of alcohol would be going around, a lot of drugs. I never would allow anything heavier than alcohol or weed. The couple times that people did bring cocaine to the house, as soon as I got wind of it, they got kicked out, because in my mind, that's the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. And I wasn't going to jail for anybody. I enjoy my freedom very much. Then, even though I had a group of friends, that's when she really started latching on to me. And it became where we were hanging out at nighttime. Then it was, as soon as I was waking up in the morning, she was calling my phone and would want to come over and want to hang out. And then that's when the day smoking started. And we would go to the lake, or we would just hang out in my backyard and just talk, really just getting to know each other, telling childhood stories and childhood fears, childhood traumas, which ended up being the trauma bond, because I was molested at the age of 4 and 8, and she tells a story of being molested, which by her stepfather, and he ended up killing himself, hanging himself. But now, in where I am now in life, I even questioned if that story is real.
So, let me just kind of ask, first off, let me preface it. I told you I'm trying to be impartial here. I'm trying to play the middle ground just because it's not me. This is your story, but I do gotta ask, as someone who enjoys her freedom, how in the world did you get locked into a relationship like this?
As of right now, how I understand how I was able to get locked into this is daddy issues. It breaks down to daddy issues. My dad and I had a very volatile relationship growing up. It wasn't until after he left my mom where I ignored him for 2 years, and when I finally allowed him back into my life, I set hard boundaries, and I told him if he even puts a pinky toe over it, that I would cut him off and never talk to him again, ever. My daddy, when my mama told my daddy that she was pregnant with me, because I'm the baby, I'm the youngest of three girls, he became enraged, and the reason I know his reaction was because my older sister was in the room, and she told me this story when I got older, and then after my mother died, her sister confirmed it. That when my mother told my dad that she was pregnant with me, he flipped the kitchen table in a rage and left, just walked out and left. And he came back. I don't know if it came back that night or the next day, but he wasn't thrilled, and he wanted her to abort me. And my mama refused because of her past that I later found out when I was 21 years old. But she refused. And so he became enraged again. And then when he realized that she was going to keep me, and this was before sonograms and all that, so go to the doctor. The doctor tells them, because of where I was sitting and because I had a faster heart rate, and still to this day I still do, that I was a boy. So then he was over the moon. He was finally getting the son that he always wanted. So day comes, mama's water breaks, and that's a whole story that I heard every year that I was born, that actually puts a smile on my face. But get to the hospital, I was the only one my mama had natural. I didn't give her time at all. In fact, they had to hold her legs together to keep me from popping out. I come out and I'm a girl. Well, dreams were shattered. And at that point, he wanted her to give me up for adoption. And I never knew any of this until after my dad had left my mom. He had come back to get some of his things. They went out on the back porch. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and I overheard them discussing what I just said. And Libby, my older sister, had hinted to this stuff as a teenager, but it never really clicked, because as a teenager you're all about yourself. You know what I mean? You're not concerned about what your parents doing. And my parents were fighting and screaming like hell. That's the house I grew up in. It was my daddy, I now know, was a narcissist himself. My mother was an empath like myself, and it was like oil and water. It just didn't go.
So I guess in a way it'd be safe to say that there was resentment from both of you towards each other, in a way.
Yes, very much so. I never understood as a child. One minute Daddy would be very affectionate and loving, and the next minute he wouldn't talk to me for weeks on end because I said or did something that would piss him off. And I never understood. I knew my dad didn't like me a whole lot, and I never knew why. And I now understand that the reason he didn't like me is because I could see through his lies, and I could see through all the BS that he was putting out. Because my dad was what I thought at the time the master champions of liars. That's what I used to call him. I now know that this woman I was involved in, my daddy is like Little League compared to her as far as lying. I could read right through it. My older sister could read right through it. That's why the two of us caught the most hell from him. The berating, the you're not good enough, no matter what we did. It was never good enough. And both of us, our whole lives, were seeking that approval from anybody, just to be loved, to be recognized, to be validated. And I ended up, the last 10 years of my dad's life, because of the boundaries I put on him, I ended up getting the relationship with my father I should have had my whole life. But in getting that relationship with my dad, I alienated my mother, who turned into the parent that my father was growing up. Extremely critical, extremely judgmental, telling me my soul was going to rot in hell for this polyamorous relationship. And when she said it, it cut me to the core, and I didn't understand. But I understand now that my mother saw what I could not see. Even my own father told me to get away from them. That should have been the red flag of all red flags, is when my dad told me to get away from them.
So I want to kind of jump back into that area for the knowledge of what exactly is the term to define that relationship. I know you said polyamorous, but for people who may not know, what is that?
A polyamorous relationship is when there are three people involved in a relationship. They were boyfriend and girlfriend, and I was their girlfriend. It started out with me and her being friends, and then New Year's Eve, of 2008, I had just broken up with my boyfriend 5 days earlier, right after the day after Christmas, which that's a moment right now I'm having. Christmas seems to be a traumatic time of year for me now that I really think about it. The day, I had broken up with my boyfriend, and I was mad, and I wanted revenge. So Christmas Eve comes around, they have a big party at their house. They had gotten some ecstasy pills, and I took 2 of them, and that was the first time that we had a threesome. It was New Year's Eve 2008, I believe, 7 or 8. And to me, it was just a one-night thing. I didn't think anything of it the next day. I kept going about my life. And then my dad went into ICU. And again, because I felt like I'd only had my real father for 10 years. I wanted more time, and I wasn't going to get it. It was bad. It was as bad as it could be. My birthday rolls around. He's in the hospital. They throw a big birthday party for me to try to cheer me up. The big keg party, massive. It was over 100 people. It was insane. And again, ecstasy was brought into the picture. I took them because I wanted to numb what I was feeling. And that's when the second threesome happened. The next morning, and by then, I had started developing feelings for her through a trauma bond that I now understand as a trauma bond, where I felt like I loved her. And I did. I wholeheartedly loved her. I won't take that away. He leaves for work the next morning, and when I open up my eyes, I just remember seeing her hip and her skin, and I just reached out and rubbed my hand on her hip, and she rolled over, and I could see the wanting in her eyes as much as she saw it in mine. And that was the first time me and her had sex together, which turned into a 6-month affair. What I thought was behind his back, but now I understand that is, they were grooming me.
So all in all, I guess the word, we spoke about this before we started, I guess the word that I could use would be swingers. And what you thought was behind his back, he ultimately knew about, and this was all part of some kind of elaborate plan to lock you in.
Yes, I do believe that what I thought, and I was struggling. Well, for the first month with me and her, it was such a whirlwind, and everything was so passionate and just exciting, and it forbidden. It seemed, even though I knew it wasn't the right thing and I was struggling, but for the first month, I just rolled with it, because during that, my father had died. So, and when I put him in the ground, half of me went. So I figured and she was there. She never left my side. She was there when I cried. She was there to talk to me. She was there through it all. She would spend the night with me, call him and say, hey, she's tore up, I'm staying here with her. And she would just hold me as I'd just cry and fall asleep. And But after about a month of that, I really started struggling with the guilt of cheating on him. Like, because I considered him a friend at that point, and he was very sweet. I hadn't seen anything violent yet. So I felt guilty doing that to him. And I was constantly like, we can't do this, we need to call this off. And then she would come at me harder and telling me that she loved me and that she really wanted to be with me. She wasn't even sure if she really wanted to be with him, that she wanted to be with me. And that went on for 6 months. And one day in September, he had brought some pants over to the house. I had broken it off with her probably a couple days before this. He came to the house for my sister to sew some pants up for him, and we were sitting out on the back porch while my sister was sewing up his stuff, and it just came out that I told him that we had been carrying a 6-month affair and that I was in love with her, but I could not do this anymore because I didn't want to hurt him, and it was wrong, and I felt guilty, but I felt like he needed to know what was going on. And his reaction wasn't shock. I saw tears kind of well up in his eyes. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think that was more I don't think he was hurt by the affair. I think he was hurt that he wasn't involved, because it started out with the 3 and then we splintered off. But now I know that the split off had to happen in order to bring me to both of them. And then he left and I just fell apart. And then the next day she called me to come to the house, and by then they had already had a daughter who I immediately felt a connection with. Like, the moment I held her in my arms, I felt like she was meant for me. It was my baby. I think they refer to them as karmic children, where they're yours but not really, you know what I mean? So I had this extreme attachment to her, and she was crying and begging me not to leave, and that she loved me and she wanted to be with me, and I fighting, we can't do this, and the whole time she's pulling me towards the bedroom. Well, we ended up in the bed. She starts taking my clothes off. We start making out heavily. He was at work. The next thing I know, I hear the bedroom door open, and I look over, and he's standing there with shock, rage, all these emotions written all over his face, and he turns and goes outside. Well, she jumps out of the bed and chases after him. I'm freaking out, put my clothes back on, hysterical, just crying, like, what have I done? Like, how could I allow this to get here? And I run out, and the only thing I say to him is that I'm sorry, this is not what I wanted. And I jump in the car and leave, and I go down to the park that was down there by my house, and he comes down there. Next thing I know, here comes his truck, and he gets out and he talking to me and asked me to come back to the house where all 3 of us could talk about this. And I agreed, and we went back, and we all went into the bedroom, and we were sitting on the bed, and that's when he expressed that he wanted this to work between all 3 of us, because he loved me as much as he loved her. That's the first time he had said that he had loved me.
So, I guess my question here is, do you feel, after saying what you just said and playing it back over and over in your mind, that it was maybe more so her who was instigating and bringing the idea in? Or would you say he had a little bit more involvement than maybe he was leading into?
Knowing what I know now, I think they both had equal hands in it. They saw something that they wanted. He knew that I was not naturally attracted to him, but I wasn't to her either. It was through the trauma bond that I fell in love with her, because she was telling me everything I wanted to hear from what I thought I would want out of a partner. And up until then, she's the only female I've ever been with, and will be the only female I've ever with. It was always men for me. I'd never been with a female. And because the men I had been with in the past had treated me like crap, there was something about her softness and femininity that I needed, because I was, at that point, I was kind of done with men, in a sense, that I just had enough. And I think that's what it was, her softness and tenderness. She treated me and listened to me in a way that I wanted a man to.
So in a way, she was playing the long game. He just kind of happened to jump in.
Yes, she was the, and knowing what I know now, she is the one who goes out and makes these bonds with these insecure women. And I presented myself as, forgive the language, a badass that could take anything. But the truth be told is, I was a very insecure, scared little child who had never been properly loved. And she was giving me and showing me things that I'd always wanted. And prior to that, when we were friends, like, I now see that, like I said, I'd never been with a woman. I've always been attracted to men, still am. But like certain things that I would say, her comment would be, "Oh, well, you're really a lesbian." And that was the first 2 years of our friendship, because we were friends for 2 years before anything ever even happened sexually. So and my older sister had done that, because my older sister had come out as gay when I was 15, and she had told me that if I'm gay, you have to be gay. So I had that replaying from my older sister in my head. And then I thought, well, maybe because nothing's ever worked out with a man, maybe I am gay. You know? So the head games were real. But they are predators together. They see something that they want, and she is sent out to go get it and convince whoever their new supply or victim is that they are what's best for them. And with me, it was a little bit different, because everybody else, all the other women and even men, they were just for sex. They wanted something different from me, and I now know they wanted my soul.
So let's kind of get into that part a little bit. Like, what sort of things were they into that would kind of compromise those morals that you were brought up on, that integrity that you wanted to keep about yourself?
I think the reason that they like me is because I was very selective. I did not just have sex with anyone. I was very guarded when it came to that. I was very vocal when it came to that I'm not just going to give it up. That's not the way I am. I understood that that was a special bond that you don't share with just anybody. I was clean. Even when I would have sex, it was never unprotected. Never. Which, through that 15-year relationship, they compromised me at every corner, unknowingly to me, by cheating, and with men and with women. I've now come to realize that for her, I was everything that she was not. I had the personality, I had the charm, I had the wit, the humor, I had the social status that she wanted. I had the upbringing that she never had. I had the love of both of my parents that she never had. I had siblings that absolutely adored me and would kill for me, which she never had. Her siblings and mother have always been in competition with her for everything, and still are. So it was my light that they wanted. And from a spiritual point of view, I now realize that they wanted to break me, which was one of his favorite things. That after I went back to him the second time, that was one of his favorite sayings. Was he would say to me, "There's nothing more than I love than to break a," which I thought was just him being arrogant and egotistical, and because that's who he was, a very inflated sense of self. But now I know he was speaking directly to me, that was his goal, was to break me.
So when was it that you began to realize that it was a little bit darker than it initially was? Like, when did that darker side begin to show itself?
We tried to make it work the first time for about 6 months, and I couldn't take it. I couldn't take the sharing. I was having emotions that I had never had before, jealousy being the main one. I've never been jealous of anybody. I've always been very secure, for the most part, or I thought, of who I was and what I wanted to be in life. But all of a sudden I was having these jealous feelings towards him and towards her, and I just couldn't do it. And it was the first time we tried this threesome, there were no rules set. So I didn't know the rules. I was like a child. I didn't know what was appropriate and what was not, but I now understand that they had rules, but they weren't going to make me aware of them. I was walking blindly through this. So my understanding is that I was only supposed to be with both of them. Never one-on-one. So it got to a point, probably about a month into doing this, where he would wait for her to fall asleep, and then he would come over there and want to have sex with me. And I didn't know what was appropriate and what I was, and he was wanting to have sex with me, so I allowed him to have sex with me, even though I knew while it was happening, after it was happening, that it was wrong, and he was telling me not to tell her, and I was like, well, that's not how this is supposed to work. She needs to know. And it finally came to a boiling point where I told her that we were having sex while she was sleeping, and she flipped and blew it and blew up, and it all became my fault. And then I was dropped like a hot potato, like the next day, like ghosted, silent treatment, nothing. And then she started posting pictures on Facebook, like that very next night they went out to a bar and were all kissing pictures and happy faced with her and her family. And it devastated me. Like, they made that I did this on purpose, that I was trying to steal her man from her, and that wasn't the case at all. I was just trying to be honest with her about what was happening behind her back.
So this all happened like 6-7 months in. But what kind of changed that sense of ghosting to make it to where you kind of jump back in with them?
All right, well, after that ghosting period, several months went by, and no, let me come it back. Start mixing things up, forgive me. A week went by, and her brother, I was at work, and I get a phone call from her. Well, I was out at a table and couldn't answer it, so as soon as I got the chance, I went into the manager's office and listened to the voicemail, and she was hysterical. All I could hear was she said her brother's name and that he was in a wreck and it was bad. So I call her back immediately, and she is inconsolable, like, what is happening, and begging me to come down to the hospital because that's where they all were. So I look at my manager and I said, I gotta go, and it was in the end of the night, so he was like, go. So I get on the way down there. I knew that he was already gone before I ever got there, because I felt him go. So I knew getting to the hospital that it was going to be between her and her mother and sisters and all that it was going to be. So I show up and I come out the parking garage, and they're there on the corner standing out there smoking cigarettes. He's up in the ICU. He had a wreck. He didn't have a seatbelt on, and he hit his head on the windshield twice and was ejected from the vehicle. So massive brain damage. He was brain dead. And I just walk up to her, and she just falls apart in my arms. And he was there at the time. They're not married at this point. And by now they have 2 children. And no, go back. I'm mixing it up again. So that's what initially was the death of her brother, brought me back into her life, and all I wanted to be at that point was just a friend to her. And so I tried to help her through that with her brother, but then it got to a point where she pushed me away again. So I just left her alone, went off and doing my own thing and all that, and then she calls and tells me that she's pregnant with her second one, and that's actually the child that I witnessed being birthed. I was in the room. So natural connection again, bond to lock me in, because they knew my fear of never being able to have children of my own. And then we were kind of on and off a little bit where we'd have sex, and then, I would bow out and be like, no, and then they pull me back in, have sex again, bow out, all that. Well, the breaking point for me to finally say enough was we had all bought Rascal Flatts tickets to go to the concert. And I was supposed to go with them and another friend of theirs, but something in my gut, when other girls at work were like, hey, we want to go. So I was like, okay, sure. So there were 3 other girls from work who wanted to go. Well, about a week before the concert, I told my main friend, I said, I really don't think I should ride to Atlanta with them, because I don't want to be stuck. I just knew I didn't want to ride with them. So she was like, well, we'll just drive in my car. So I call her and tell her that y'all go and that I'm going to ride up with my friends, which she didn't like. But so the day the concert comes, we get up, me and my friends, we go on up, we're shopping and eating lunch and having a good old time. Well, the closer the concert gets, he keeps blowing up my phone. He does. Are y'all coming? Are y'all on the way to the amphitheater? Da 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 da. And I was like, yeah, we're on the way. Well, we get there. We really had no intentions of watching the concert with them because of the friction that was happening. But as we were walking along, they see us. And so we go over there next to them. Well, I can't remember, because Rascal Flatts was their first date. They saw Rascal Flatts on their first date. So at a certain song, all of a sudden her best friend starts hitting me on the arm and like starts pointing to her and TJ. And at that point, I see TJ drop down on one knee and propose to her. And it shattered me, because up in that point, she kind of kept me thinking that she was going to leave him and come be with me, because that's what she was telling me over these periods of time, that she really didn't want to be with him, that I was her soulmate, I was the one she truly loved, and that because of the child they had together, that she couldn't really leave, and da 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 da. Now I understand it was all part of the mind games that was coming. She never had any intentions of leaving him, but she was telling me the opposite, to keep me hooked, to keep me, because she knew I truly loved her, to keep me there. And so as soon as the last note was sung at the concert, my friend grabs my arm, because I was just on the edge, like barely hanging on, trying not to bust out crying and lose my shit. Sorry. She turns me and gets me out of there as fast as she can and puts me in that car, and all the way home, I bawled my eyes out. It was over. It was done. So I sent her an email the next day, pretty much, I love you, but I can't do this, and I have to go find my own happiness now. And that was it. Cut off. She didn't want it to be cut off. She kept trying to text me and email me and all that, and I just ignored it. I ignored it. So, almost a year went by, and I was still friends with her on Facebook. She posts something about, because I knew that she was posting things for me, because she would make them public. We weren't, and whatever she posted, it was like, I miss you and I want you back in my life, kind of thing. And at that point, I was very lonely. And so I contacted her. I texted her and said, I miss you too, and I miss our friendship, and I miss talking to you and sharing things with you. And then she calls me and was like, well, can I come over and can we talk? And I was like, yeah, come on, And so she comes over, and I just got a new apartment. I showed her around my apartment because I was very proud. And we open up a bottle of wine and sit on the couch and start kind of catching up and all that. And then that's when she tells me that a month before that her and him had gotten arrested for DUIs on the same night.
Okay, so while we were just talking during this little break that we had, you said there were some things that you needed to recount and correct and everything like that as far as the timeline goes. But right after that, I want to get into a little bit of the darker stuff, the manipulation, the kind of from the beginning, how you said there were some things that you had flashbacks on and stuff like that.
Okay, now that I've had time to kind of go through the timeline better in my head, the second child that was born, right after I had admitted her and I's affair to her boyfriend, it was probably 2 weeks later that she called me and told me that she was pregnant with the second child, and which utterly devastated me, and I did not react well to it. Over the next several months, we were holding on to our friendship by a thread, and that's when she asked me to be in the room when she was born, which I was thrilled about because I thought I would never get to see a birth of a child before. So I accepted that and helped her through that pregnancy, and because he was non-existent as far as any kind of supporting or nurturing or caring type role. So I did get to witness the second child's birth, which still to this day will be one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. She's the one I worry about the most in all this, because they always ignored her because she marched to her own little beat, and she would not be bullied into doing what they wanted her to do. She always chose things for herself and not for them. Unlike the oldest and the baby, they just basically are trying to relive their failed dreams through the oldest and the youngest, and unfortunately I know now from my own experience, and because for living in that for 15 years, that the oldest and youngest will never live up to the expectations that they hold of them. And when they win and they do good, then they take the credit. They don't give the credit to the child, they take the credit. But if the child fails or embarrasses them, then they have to hear it for the rest of the night and even in a couple days afterwards. So it's a very mentally abusive, emotionally abusive game that they like to play with their children. But the middle one, and she even called me her mother because they ignored her so much, and because it was the one that I got to see born. That's the one I attached to the most. The oldest and youngest would always say, she's your favorite. And I would always say, she's not my favorite. I love all of y'all equal. It's just, I have more in common with her. But I love all of you equally. There's nothing I wouldn't do for any of the three of you. So that timeline needs to be straightened, and then the timeline from when he proposed to her at the Rascal Flatts concert, it was a week after that her brother was killed in a car wreck. So those are the corrections that need to be made within the timeline, that through all the mess in my head that I got a little messed up.
So it's safe to say that you and their middle child had this connection that was just kind of beyond just, that's your friend's kid. It was more of, that is your kid, because technically you were there for the first few years, since birth, and you pretty much brought that kid up. But I do want to jump back into the flashbacks we were talking about earlier, the specific one that you had mentioned. Let's go ahead and jump on that a little bit.
Okay, about 2 weeks after I'd left, I was talking with my sister about things, and she said something that triggered a memory from about a year into the friendship, where we were just friends. That's all we were just hanging out, getting high, partying together. And a friend of mine that I had known for like 2 years had asked me out on a date. And I accepted, and we went on a date, and then we ended up at a bar, and we were playing pool. And I had told her about this date, and told her that we were going to go shoot pool at this particular bar and all that. Well, him and I were having a good time, talking, playing, flirting, shooting pool. And all of a sudden I look up, and she's standing there in the bar. And so I, hey, how you doing? Da 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 da. And I introduced her to him, and we continued to play pool, but the whole time she was right by my side. Wherever I moved, she moved. And she made it real uncomfortable. Making him uncomfortable. I was so used to her by then that I didn't really see what she was doing. Now I see it clearly, but it made him uncomfortable. And he said to me, he was at the bar, and I went up, and he said to me, well, I guess the date is over now. And I apologized. I told him I had no idea she was just going to show up like that. So he cashes out, gives me a hug, tells me he had a good time, and we'll try to do it again. And I was like, okay. So he leaves, and me and her continue to play pool. At that point, I'd only had one beer, and she went up and got us another beer. While she was getting a beer, there was another guy that came around the pool table, and he, kind of egotistical guy, and I was talking crap back a little bit, and he got a little angry because I was pretty much told him to go away. And so she comes back with the beers. I drink about half the beer, and then I needed to go to the bathroom, so I went to the bathroom. And when I come out from the bathroom, and she had my beer, like, she was sitting there with our beers. Nobody else had been around them. Nobody else had touched them. I was feeling really sick, like nauseous sick. And I tell her, I don't feel good. We need to get out of here. And I had driven myself up there, and I asked her if she could drive me home. And she was like, yeah, just get in my car. I'll take you home. Well, we didn't even get out the parking lot before I had to fling the door open and just projectile vomited out the door. And then the next thing I remember is I woke up in their bed. They're asleep. I'm on the out. side of the bed, and they're on the middle and inside of the bed. And all I had on was my t-shirt. And my head hurt. It's worse than any hangover I'd ever had. And I've had some pretty big... Tequila's my favorite, so you can imagine the hangovers I've endured from tequila. So it was worse than anything, and the nauseousness was worse than anything I had ever felt. I really felt like I'd been hit by a Mack truck. And so I lived right down the road. So instead of waking them up, I just put my clothes on, my pants, my underwear, and my pants on, and I walk home. It took me exactly 7 minutes to walk home. I get in the house, I take a shower, I put some pajamas back on, and I go to sleep. I wake up, that was like 7 in the morning. I wake up around 3 or 4 that afternoon, and I'm still feeling like the Mack truck has hit. Nauseous, headache, like migraine-worthy headache. And I'm sitting there with a Sprite and some saltines trying to get my stomach to calm down. And I have a flashback, or a flashback is the word I know to call it. And the flashback was of him on top of me thrusting. So I didn't really know what to think of it. So I thought, well, it didn't feel like I'd had sex, but it didn't feel like I hadn't had sex. You know what I mean? It felt, my vagina felt a little different, but it didn't feel like it was anything rough. You know what I mean? So a friend of mine had told me that she had been roofied 6 months before. So I called her and I asked her what it was like, what it felt like to be roofied. And everything that she described was exactly how I was feeling. And I said to her, I think I was roofied last night. And she was like, well, tell me what was happening. Where were you? Who are you with? And I told her what happened at the bar, and that he showed up out of nowhere. And that I woke up in their bed with nothing but my t-shirt on. And I had told my friend everything that had happened the night before, and that I ended up in their bed with nothing but my t-shirt on, and that I'd walked home. And so she asked me if I thought they had raped me, and I was like, I don't know. And so she told me, she said, this is what you do. She said, you call them, and you don't accuse, you just tell them you think you were roofied. And I was like, okay. And she said their reaction should kind of let you know what's kind of happening. And I was like, okay. So I call her phone. He answers, and he's asking what happened, where'd you go, da 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 da. And I told him that I thought I was roofied last night. And he got dead silent. And I was like, what happened? Like, why? How did I end up at y'all's house? How did I end up in your bed with nothing but my t-shirt on? And he was like, well, you were just real messed up, so we figured she'd just bring you here so we could take care of you, and we figured you'd sleep better in just a t-shirt, and da-da-da. And he was becoming irritated. I could hear it in his voice that he was kind of irritated, and he really quit talking at that point. And he just said, well, I'll have her call you back. 1 hour later, she calls me back, and she's yelling at me. Why are you accusing him of raping you? Why are you doing this? Why are you saying that? And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I said, I never accused him of raping me. I just said that I thought I had been roofied. And she was like, well, I'm coming over. This is going to get straightened out. And I was like, okay. So like 5 minutes later, she's at the door, And I'm telling her what I remembered and how I was feeling, and she goes, well, that's not what happened, and that couldn't have happened, and you just dreamed that. And at the point, I was so confused, and I trusted them at that point wholeheartedly. I didn't think they were capable of that. And at the time, I didn't know about her high school best friend telling the same story I just told. So 2 weeks after I had left, I was talking with my sister, and my sister said something that triggered the flashback of him on top of me, gently thrusting. He was gentle about it. And after spending 15 years with them and knowing that one of his favorite things is to sleep with you while you're sleeping, it's a thing for him. He likes to do things to you while you sleep. And I would always wake up, but his girlfriend, now wife, would never wake up. He could have rough sex with her, and she would sleep all the way through it. The minute he touched me, I would wake up. But that's because of the molestation at 4 and 8, and I was raped in college. Violently raped. And they knew that. And I now know that they took my worst fear and made me relive it for 15 years.
So one of the things that you mentioned to me was how the family, her family, played into this. One specific would be her mother. I kind of want you to elaborate on that a little bit, if you don't mind. Like, what kind of things she would pull on you, or what kind of things she would, like, kind of play mind games with you about, or do, or I think you said something about her physical appearance.
Well, her mother has always been a dark, gloomy figure over the entire family. This is a woman who, her eyes are black. They're literally black. When she looks at you, it's what I would imagine the devil looking at you. That's what it feels like. It feels like she sees straight into your soul, to your worst possible fears, and that she can read that from you, and she will use that against you at any time, at any place. It does not matter. Her mother is an extremely narcissistic and selfish woman. She has been in competition with her daughters their whole lives. She has told all of her daughters that they'll never amount to anything without a man, that you better find a man to pay your bills for you, and you better know how to please him sexually, basically do whatever he wants you to do. When my first initial meeting of her mother, my immediate intuition was to reject this woman. I knew there was something off about her. I knew there was something inherently evil about her. My sister and I met her at the same time, and my sister immediately rejected her as well. But because of my love for her, I would try to protect my energy from her as much as possible, but she's such a ominous presence that she's hard to ignore. The first time after I had told him about our affair behind his back, a couple months later, she invites me out to her mama's house, and it's me and her mom, and her mom's best friend, and we start doing rattlesnake shots and getting drunk. And then I allowed her mom to do a tarot reading on me, and they had always talked about being witches and thought that they were from witches and were a coven, and that they were into witchcraft and occult type stuff. Well, I didn't take too much into it, and at the time I was not spiritually educated or equipped to understand what they were talking about, much less what I was dealing with. So I allowed her mother to do a tarot reading on me, and she saw in the cards that night that not only was one of my parents going to die, but I was going to inherit a good bit of money. And so, I took it like I take that stuff, like a grain of salt, throw it over the back and be done with it. Well, then after the proposal and her brother dying, we got together again like that with me, her best friend, and her mother's best friend and her, and drinking rattlesnakes again. Little did I know I was in a room full of rattlesnakes, huh? And I let her do another reading on me, a love reading this time. And of course, the reading came out exactly what I wanted it to hear, was that me and Stephanie were soulmates, and that we were meant to be together, that we were twin flames. So I now understand that they were practicing witchcraft and black magic on me, and sex magic. That's what those two were doing to me to keep me bonded to them. And for a while it worked, because I had, up until that point in my life, I had never experienced such passion and such good sex, you know what I mean? Adventurous and just passion like that. So that was an addiction for me. I'd never had anybody love or be that way with me. So and I became addicted to it. It was like a drug. She was a drug to me. I now know that. But and her sister, who also dabbled with witchcraft and black magic and tarot readings and stuff, and it was always the darker side, not the light, but the dark side. And I allowed her to do a reading on me as well, and I can't remember really what the reading said and all that. It's all kind of blurry on that point because so much was going on. But I now understand what they were doing. They were bonding me to them. It's not just these two who were practicing witchcraft. It was an entire family. It's a cult. It's a cult of them, and it even stretches out to friends and cousins, and they were all doing this, and they were all playing mind games with me, because a lot of the friends that were around us were always envious of our relationship setup. They wish they were very vocal about it. I wish me and my husband could have what y'all have, or I wish me and my boyfriend could have what y'all have. And I was always very honest about it, that it's not for everybody, that I would not recommend this for anybody, that it creates a lot of jealousy, it creates a lot of hostility. You know, when the times are good, they're good, but when they're bad, they're real bad. And they're real good. They were real good at putting on a facade for the outside world. I was the only one that would see that mask drop. And even to this day, they have assembled an army of people through a smear campaign that has been going on for 15 years behind my back, where they're telling me, we love you and you're the best thing that's ever happened to us, and I don't know what us and the kids would do without you, and all this. But in the same breath, the minute I was at home raising their children and they were out sexing and drugging and doing what they wanted to do, they were smearing me, telling everybody that I was the jealous one, I was the controlling one, that I was the manipulator, that I was the liar. And the only reason I know what was being said is because I heard it straight from her mouth. She was telling everybody that I was abusing the children, and they were terrified of me, that I never cooked, I never cleaned, I never paid bills, when the truth of the matter was that I was the only one doing that. I now realize everything that she's saying about me is how she feels about herself. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart.
So, aside from the readings and this smear campaign and all these people working against you, but basically playing this long con to your face, things still continued to get worse. I believe one of the things that you mentioned was there was certain acts of rage that were committed, and I kind of want to touch on that a little bit, if you don't mind. I know it's been a little difficult for you recounting all this stuff, but I feel like it really plays into the knowledge aspect of you know, what people should know before they even consider doing this kind of thing.
I started to notice not long after the second time going back to them, that I was losing a lot of my close friends. Well, not losing, but they were backing away because I had gone back to them. And family pulled away. Everybody did. Friends I'd known for 20, 25 years. People were looking at me in one or two ways. Either they seemed angry with me for unknown reasons, unknowns to I didn't know why they were angry with me. I thought maybe I'd been too honest in a situation, and that they were still holding that resentment over. And then the other look I would get from my oldest friends was, what the hell are you doing? Like, do you not understand? Do you not know what they're doing? But they never would say anything. It was just in their eyes. I could feel it from them that something was off. And I now know how they got away with all the lying and cheating and smear campaigning and backstabbing, is that they were telling everyone that this was an open relationship and that I knew about all these other people, and I was okay with that, which is not the truth. I had no idea. I thought we were in a committed relationship amongst each other. I even had expressed to them that if they felt the need to step out, all they had to do was talk to me about it. But they knew, because of the type of woman that I always saw myself as, that they knew that if they stepped out, that I would walk. They knew I had that much self-worth left in me. And I had always said, as far as with myself, that I'm not a cheater. If I'm gonna cheat, I will break up with you before I cheat on you. That's not the kind of person I am. And even texting and sexting, that's cheating. I'm sorry, folks, but that's cheating. It's emotionally cheating, which is a lot of times worse than the physical. I can get over the physical, it's the emotional that I can't. So, and unbeknownst to me, they pretty much started cheating immediately. And there was one occasion they had tried to talk me into swinging with them, and I would not. I let them know that I'm not interested in that lifestyle. I'm only interested in you and raising these children with you, and growing old together. That was what they promised. That was the promise, that we'd have a family and we'd have these children and we would grow old, and when the children got older, that we would travel, because that was always a passion of mine, and I thought it was hers too, was to travel and see the world. So they made all these empty promises. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And on one occasion, a friend of theirs that they had gone to high school with, a guy, he had lost his sister to murder, and we went over there to comfort him, and we all ended up in the hot tub together. And I was just being nice, nothing big deal. Well, those two start making out with each other in the hot tub, and then she comes over and starts making out with his friend, and he pulls me over to him, and he starts making out with me, and it was getting hot and heavy between her and his friend, and me and him could tell it was about to go down, they were about to have sex. Well, right before that, he pulls her back over to him and then shoves me over there to his friend. And I didn't want to, but I allowed him to have sex with me. And then afterwards we go home, and from that point until right up before I left, they used that night to throw in my face and to beat me up about. And my response was, well, I thought that's what y'all wanted. I thought that's what, I had no idea that's what the plan was, but now I know that was the whole point of us going over there that night, was that's what they wanted to happen. And I always, from the moment we got home, all throughout the years, I always expressed regret. Why did I let that happen? I should have never let that happen. That's not what I didn't want to sleep with him. I didn't want to, but I thought that's what they wanted. And I was, at that point, I was just all about making them happy, whatever would make them happy. So that's the only time anything like that ever happened. I would not put myself, they tried with other females and males to put me in that situation and predicament again over the years, and I would back out, and I'm going to the car. I'm done. I'm not doing this. And then probably about a year after that had happened, we were all in the bedroom together, and he liked to play air games, and he had always talked about having fantasies of raping and strangling a woman. And fantasies are fantasies. I wasn't there. I'm not going to judge you for having a fantasy. And he always made it out like it was just a fantasy. So, well, anyway, we were fooling around, and he had gotten into where he liked to choke you and play air games and stuff, and she would let him go harder than I would, because it would freak me out. Well, he went a little too hard one night, and it flashed me back to when I was raped in college, and I freaked, and it enraged him to the point where he chased me out to the living room, pinned me down on the couch, and started to strangle me. And as he was strangling me, yelling at me, saying, "I'm gonna fix you. I'm gonna fix you." I couldn't get out. No matter how much I fought, I could not get out from under his grip. She was standing behind him, crying and screaming at him and to let me go and all that. And it seemed like the more she screamed, the harder he squeezed on my throat. And at one point, I saw the flash bulbs going off in front of my eyes, which I knew meant I was about to pass out. And I heard her yell at him, "Get off of her, she's turning blue." And he didn't let up, and she shoved him enough where I could get my feet up against his chest and shove him off of me. And when I did, I ran to the bathroom with my cell phone and called my sister to come to the house to get me. And she showed up, threatened to put a bullet between his eyes. I got in the car to leave with her, and then she comes out on the front lawn and falls to her knees and starts crying. And something in my heart said, I can't leave her and the children with this man. I mean, if he'll do that to me, he'll do that to her and the kids. So I got out the car. I walked back inside. When I walked back inside, he was on the couch, and he grinned at me. The most evil grin. And I told him, "I'm not leaving, but if you ever put your hands on me like that again, I will kill you." And he seemed pleased with that. So, and there were other times. The first time I was with them, where he tried to strangle me outside of a bar one night, and I made him take me home. I ran inside and locked the door, went up to my bedroom. I had forgotten that I had given her a key. She let herself in. He followed. And she came up to the bedroom trying to console me. And then I saw his shadow in the doorway, and I grabbed my gun from my nightstand and pointed it and told him, "If you take one more step, I'll shoot." And he never let me forget that night. He would just randomly, we would be having a good night, being playful and enjoying each other's company, but because he would start drinking, all of a sudden he would throw that about me. And it was always, I put the gun to his head, which was not true. I was in the bed and I pointed it at him from the bed. but it was always twisting. Whatever really happened, he would always twist it to his benefit. Like, when I went back to get clothes after this final time, he reminded me how I told you that if you left again not to come back, and I told him I knew that the night I walked out that I wasn't coming back. And he said something, and my response was, well, you tried to strangle me 7 years ago, DJ. And he goes, that didn't happen. Perfect, typical narcissist response. And she did that to me all the time. They both did. Whatever I remembered, I was told that didn't happen, and I was remembering it wrong, and I was crazy and delusional, and I was too emotional and too sensitive, and it total gaslighting. I mean, manipulation to the core. And at that point, I had lost my dad, my mom, and my sister. My sister and my mom within the same year. So, and after my sister died, I went catatonic for like 3 months. Wouldn't leave the house, wouldn't talk, wouldn't do nothing. Then they convinced me that I was bipolar and should put myself on medication. So I thought they were right, and I did. And for 6 years, I turned myself into a zombie so I didn't have to feel anything. And I got tired of living that way this past summer. And I took myself off the medication, but I didn't tell them that I was off the medication. And it wasn't until 2 months later when one of my earth angels, who never left me, she always came to check on me. She said in front of her, she goes, so how are you feeling off that medicine? And she looked floored. She's turned, you're off your medicine? I said, yeah, I haven't taken it for 2 months. And she looked mortified. She looked mortified that not only had I taken myself off of it, but that I didn't tell them about it. And at that point, I was already doing things and not telling them, because I knew if I told them there would be repercussions to that. And then there was another night where we were drinking. They had talked me into drinking. Got way too drunk. I felt sick. I went to throw up. She took me to the bathroom. I threw up. And she said, I think a bath will help you. And so she puts me into the bathtub, and it was more than just being drunk. And I honestly believe that they might have roofied me again that night. She put me in the tub and got the water running and then left me there. And I fell asleep. And the only reason I woke up is because I was snorting water. And my body felt like jello. Like I couldn't hardly move my limbs, nothing. And it got to a point I was able to get my fingers underneath the drain and lift the drain. And the water started to go down. By then I was choking on it. And I was able to basically, like a seal, flop myself out of this bathtub. And when I hit the floor, that's when she came into the door. Now I could hear them having sex in the bed while I'm trying to get myself out of this tub. And when I hit that floor, she came in and, what are you doing? Like, all mad. And I start crying and hysterical, like, you're trying to kill me. Like, why would you put me in a tub that drunk and leave the water running? And then it was, let me get you in the bed and you just need to pass out. So that's what happened. She dried me off and put me in the bed, and I passed out. And then for like the next 3 days, I was mad. I didn't talk to him. I ignored him. I didn't know what to think. And And after, like, I wrote in a journal about that. That was one of the journals they got me to burn, with the time and the date of when all this strangulation, the journal that I was writing all the horrible stuff in, that's one of the journals they taught me into burning. And now I know it's so that there wasn't proof of what they had done.
So it's safe to say that you were truly in a dance with the devil. Like, you were fighting for your life. You were told to burn any proof that you had. You were manipulated. You were gaslighted. You were basically anything that they could do to basically, like, run your mind and your life. They were doing it. So I wanna know now, after you've left. I don't know how long it's been since you've left. I want to know how it is you feel. Like, do you feel free again? Do you feel like you can be the person you were beforehand? Like, I know you still got to hold on to this stuff and live with it, but do you feel that there's more hope for your life now than there was while you were doing and going through all these things?
Well, it's been almost 2 months since I left. Through an amazing support system, friends, therapy, and God is the only reason I'm here. The night I left, I was sitting in the bathroom with a box of painkillers, ready to end it, because I thought I had nowhere to go, no one to run to. This was going to be my life. I was going to have to live in this. And there was a part of me that thought I deserved it, because ultimately you have free will. You make these choices. But I was making choices based on delusions, not on truth. Had I known the truth, I never would have done this to begin with. Had I known that they had really roofied and raped me from the beginning, I'd probably be in jail with a life sentence for murder. Because the old me would have shot them like the dogs that they are. The new me, or the person that I'm finding, realizes that vengeance and revenge is not mine, but that's God's. The only thing I can do is share this story in hopes that no other person will allow themselves to be manipulated and controlled to the point of death, either by their hands or your own. That the children that I raised, that in the last several months before I left, they all knew the relationship and how it was set up, that I told them that this is not relationship goals. You should never strive to be in a relationship like this, because ultimately somebody's going to get left out. And even then I didn't understand who I was dealing with. The covert and the malignant narcissist, and as I refer to them as the demons that I was dealing with. There were many children and people who were exposed to this relationship that through me, because of me, they thought it was okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to sell your soul to the devil for love out of loneliness, for sex, for weed, for abandonment issues that you have not healed yourself. It's not okay. And anybody that would ask you to be in such a thing, that's a red flag, and you need to hit your knees and start praying, because at that point, in my opinion, you're dealing with a demon, and that demon wants your soul at all cost. And if you are not strong enough, it will get it. And I know that night that I was sitting there with that painkillers, and I heard a voice tell me to call my sister. I now know who that was. That even though I thought he had forgotten me, he didn't. And he gave me the strength to get up and walk out. And I can't say that I'm not looking back, because I have to look back. Because if I don't, then I'll end up in another relationship just like it. And the only reason I'm doing this is because after I left, having to change banks and run full panel STD tests, and I learned quickly how many men and women have suffered in not a polyamorous, but just in normal one-on-one relationships, There's a lot of us out there. There's a lot of us, and it breaks my heart to know that people are so damaged and so possessed by something, greed, pride, all the 7 deadlies, envy, sloth, keep going, that they will prey on your soul and they will do nothing to stop until you're dead. And I'm terrified of the 3 children that I had to leave, because I know they're in danger, and I know what their life is going to be if I don't speak up. I read something the other day that said, your silence might heal you, but will it heal your children? And that's when I contacted you, because I knew that I could not stay silent, because I am not the only victim. There is a long line of women, and unfortunately, I'm the only one that is calling them out. These other women are their friends. These other women and men are helping them with their smear campaign against me. And I know they're called flying monkeys through therapy, but they don't even realize that they are victims too. That's what's scary. That's how good they are. And it needs to stop. It needs to stop. Because if I don't open my mouth and tell the truth about this 15-year circus that I've been living in, it'll never stop. And they already have their next victim. There are this girl is already in their grips, and they're gonna do to her what they did to me, except it's gonna be worse, because they're gonna be angry because I got away.
If that girl was sitting at this table in front of you, and you had just a moment to tell her anything, what would you say to her right now?
I would tell her to run as fast as she can, to never look back, and to fall to her knees and pray as hard as she can for God to come and help her. That you are gonna have whatever is leading you into that. Those are unresolved traumas that is leading you into that. And it's the devil. They literally are the devil. And they're pulling your hand into the pits of hell. And if you are not strong enough, you're gonna die. And your soul is gonna be damned. That's why my mother, on her deathbed, told me that my soul would be damned because of this relationship. And I didn't understand then, but I understand it now. She was right. I had signed my soul over to the devil for children, for fake love, and for sex. And the only relationship that matters in this life is the one between you and God. And until you know that with your whole being. And once you start realizing that, you're no longer gonna see and hear and feel in 3D. You're gonna start seeing, hearing, and feeling in 4 and 5D. God will show you. You just have to look. It's right there. And there are no coincidences. He is everywhere and in everything. You just have to quiet your mind and the demons that want to play tricks on you. You got to shut that out, and you got to listen to him, and you got to follow him, because he's there. Even if you think your soul is damned, it's not. He gives you a chance every day you wake up. He gives you a chance to free yourself from bondage. But I also understand that until you're ready, you're not ready. Because I'm 46. It's taken me 46 years to get here. And now that I see, now that I know him, there's no turning back. And I've been saying, everybody's, wondering if I'm gonna get in a relationship again and all this, and I said, I'm sure one day I will. But whoever I'm in a relationship with, you will understand this, that my relationship with God will come before you every day and every day until I draw my last breath. And if it's not the same for you, then we're wasting each other's time.
Is there anything that you want to say to people now that you have broken this 15-year hold, that you have started actively seeking a relationship with God, that you have begun to understand that you're at a point in your life where you hear the knocking and that you're prepared to open that door for him? Is there anything you want to say to let people know where you are in your walk and in your being able to find him in your life?
What I would say is, until you let him in Or even, you just gotta crack the window. You don't even have to open the door. Just crack the window. He gonna come through, and he's gonna start showing you signs. All the hurt, the pain, the trauma, the childhood issues, it all melts away. And for the first time, you will feel unconditionally loved for who you are. Even the sinner that you have been can be forgiven, no matter what you do. And I know I cry, but everybody, I've been saying it, when I do cry, talking about it, it's not sad tears, it's happy tears. Because I finally know. I know what my mom was trying to tell me, what my grandparents were trying to tell me, friends were trying to tell me. My cousin, God, my sweet cousin, she's prayed over my life for so long now, and she is part of the reason that gave me the strength to walk. When I started looking for him, she was the first person I called, and I would spend hours on the phone with her talking about scripture and what it meant, because I couldn't, and I still struggle with it, that there is salvation, but you're gonna have to do what's right, not what makes you happy. Because doing what makes you happy is how the devil gets a hold of you. Doing what's right might not make you happy, but it'll make him happy.
You know, I've heard it quite a few times put like presence over preference. Like, you can't be in his presence and put your preference for how it happens first. So I do implore anyone who has been struggling or who has been dealing with mental issues, addiction, anything, I want you to know that it's okay to not be okay, and that there is always a way out. I implore you that if you do not have a church home, find one. But don't base it off of preference. Don't base it off of the worship music. Don't base it off of because you like the pastor's message. Base it off of that feeling that you get, that chill, that spine-tingling, unconditional love. But Paula, I thank you for allowing me to do this, and I thank you for being brave enough to come and tell your story. I know we didn't touch on everything. We will have more sessions, I guarantee it. But for this one, just know that I'm always in your corner. And I will always be here with this microphone and this laptop at this kitchen table, willing to listen. I told you from the beginning that I wanted to be impartial, that I wanted to be straight down the middle with this, and I hope that I have been. So for anybody who's got anything, do not hesitate to reach out to somebody. There are hotlines, there are plenty of pastors, there are recovery outlets everywhere. Please, just reach out.